Buyurun hocam.
Okay. Good morning and welcome to the last day of the conference. Today we have got two speakers, Muzaffer Derya Nazlı Pınar Subaşı and Mustafa Büyükgeviz. And we will be talking about and discussing masculinities and literature. So I will just leave the floor for the speakers right away. And during the presentations, I kindly ask you to keep your microphones closed. And if you have questions, then we will have your questions at the end of these two presentations. Okay. So the first speaker today is Muzaffer Derya Nazlı Pınar Subaşı. And yes, she is currently working as an assistant professor at the Department of English Translation and Interpreting in Kütahya Doğu University in Turkey. She holds a PhD in English language and literature, and she has participated in many international and national conferences and published original articles in the area of her studies, particularly including her book, The Female Identity Exploration in a Patriarchal Society as Reflected in Virginia Woolf's The Voyage Out, and Haydet otherwise Handan, a comparative study. She is also one of the editors of Verbatim Theatre, an introduction and its examples, where she wrote the chapter titled The Revival of Medea in Taking Care of Baby. Her research interests include, but not limited to, comparative feminist studies and women's writing, women's and gender studies, feminist literary theory and criticism, and critical feminist translation studies. Muzaffer Hocam, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Hocam, for your nice presentation. Before starting my presentation, I would like to thank you to the organizing committee and also Barış Hocam, because I'm very excited now because Barış was my student in English Language and Literature Department in Durani University, and it's very great honor to work in the same field, and we are both academics, so it's good. So thank you. I'm very quickly starting my presentation and sharing my screen. And okay, I think everything is okay. Yeah, okay. So very quickly, I will start my presentation. So the title of my presentation is The Hegemonic Masculinity, Gender-Based Violence and Exploitation in Dennis Kelly's Taking Care of Baby. Actually, most probably through the conferences, the 3 days, lots of speeches about has been made about the definitions of the violence. So what is violence? And unfortunately, we have no standard or clear definitions because it's a kind of part of human experience, and it has many different types, ranging from the self-directed ones, interpersonal violence, to community and collective one. And even though we live in the 21st century, unfortunately, we still have the existence of violence and their adverse effects. And we are always questioning about the underlying reason for that continued violence. And we can say that the main reason is the imbalances in power relations and sociocultural conditions, we don't know. And it's a kind of vicious cycle that repeats itself, reinforces itself through the generations. And unfortunately, young generations learn from their past experiences. So that's why no society, no one is immune from violence, and it's a kind of threat to everyone. But unfortunately, and nevertheless, or however we can say that, some groups are more susceptible to that kind of violence. And based on the theories of violence, we can say that, because we talk about that, it's related with the power relations, or more precisely, hegemonic masculinity that enforces the domination of men over women. So in some societies, we see that some crimes or violence, especially against women, are socially tolerated and legally accepted. We have seen lots of sufferings, lots of scenes on TV, on social media, and also in literature. We see in the reflections in literature, in literary works, dramatic plays, we see the representation and the reflections of violence. So today in my presentation, I focus on Dennis Kelly's Taking Care of Baby. It's a kind of verbatim theater. And in that play, Dennis Kelly portrays the case of a young mother who is imprisoned for her alleged crime of murdering her children. And Dennis Kelly tries to portray how hegemonic masculinity, patriarchal dictations, androcentric discourses still label women as the embodiment of female deviance and criminality, and compare those kind of women with the mythical monsters and the fallen women. So, significant challenge remains for women despite lots of improvements on violence. You see the European Union reports or United Nations reports about violence, how to stop violence, but still we have lots of evidences and lots of events, especially violence against women. For me, the main reason of that is we cannot erase the patriarchal norms and its dictations. And that's why we have always internalized those kind of negative stereotypes and labels on women. So in Taking Care of Baby, in the play starts with the voice of Donna. She has been put into prison despite her pleadings, despite her repetitions and reiterations that I didn't kill my children. They died because of natural causes, but nobody listened to her. Because the patriarchal society accustomed to silencing women for ages, especially mothers due to their supposed nature of nurture and sacrifice, because they have to be self-sacrificing mother and faithful woman, wife, I don't know. Patriarchal court turns deaf to Donna's voice and just listen to another figure, Dr. Millard. Who is Dr. Millard? He represents the patriarchal authority and power. He's a psychologist. And he says that Donna suffers from, quote, Lehman-Kitley syndrome or LKS. He says that it's a kind of mental disorder, and that mental disorder causes some women, some mothers, to torture, to kill their children in more drastic cases to protect them from the disasters of modern life, such as, again, quote from the work play, global warming, terrorism, tsunamis, hurricanes, new imperialism, Islamic fundamentalism, Christian fundamentalism, unquote. So based on the assumptions of Dr. Millard, Donna, even though she pleaded...
I don't like...
Sorry? Sorry, I couldn't hear. Mustafa Hocam, okay, anything, any problem? May I continue with my presentation?
Yes, go on.
Okay. Because I heard some kind of voices, so I couldn't be sure that, everything is okay now. Okay. So I'm repeating again, Donna, because of the assumptions and accusations of Dr. Millard, is put into prison. But Donna says that I'm innocent. But nobody listens to her. And after some time, Dr. Millard and his theory of LKS, that syndrome, was proven that, quote from the play, quote, fictitious, fabricated illness that exists only in the mind of its inventor. But again, nobody listens to Donna. And again, the inventor keeps insisting on the reliability of his theory by making a comparison with the mythological story, quote, the Greek tragedy of Medea, who kills her children for revenge on her husband, unquote. And Medea is always regarded as the evil cold mother and neglecting her feminine duties and the embodiment of criminality and monster, female deviance. So in androcentric courses, and ranging from the novels, dramas, or plays, if women commit serious crimes, they are immediately labeled as monsters, fallen women. Why? Because these women are trying to deconstruct or subvert the father's law, subversive patriarchal expectations. So that's why when you see the quotation from here again, most probably because the patriarch's darkest fears about those women, those labeled and stigmatized as monster women, quote from Chester, the fear of the disobedient woman, the fear of the unwed mother, the fear of the sparred wife turned to rebel, the fear of the witch, the fear of media. So that's why they are automatically, they are automatically labeled, stigmatized as monster mothers or monster women. But who is Medea? Most of us know that it's the famous work of Euripides, has lots of definitions. First, she was defined as a kind of foreigner, barbarian, a sexual and exotic subject, object desire for Jason, then portrayed as oppressed wife, then turns into revengeful and bad woman because of her husband's infidelity. And then she is discredited because, okay, she killed her children and she is labeled as monstrous killing mother in androcentric works. But no emphasis has been given to her husband, Jason, because he discards her Medea for another woman, but no mention about that because of the phallocentric values. That's why Medea has always been demonized for killing her sons, but Agamemnon, remember another mythological character, he has not been cursed like Medea, but he has been canonized for sacrificing his daughter. We are not using the word murdering or killing, but sacrificing his daughter. Why? Because if a man kills, he becomes a murderer or doing that violence because of sacrificing, because of honor, or there are lots of exceptions and lies for men, but for women, if she commits any crime, it's spiritual crime, becomes a source of all evil. Because Medea here is not, okay, killing her sons, but also killing the patriarchal dictations, and she dares to play the traditional male role as the ultimate arbiter of ancestral line. So what I mean is that, yes, it's a cruel infanticide, but also it's a kind of challenge to phallocentric ideologies. Because, you know, phallocentric ideologies always consider human bodies as just passive and secure vessels, womb for male seed and the line. But as Karen Raber explained in her essay titled Murderous Mothers and the Family State Analogy in Classical and Renaissance Drama, quote, Medea completes her usurpation of masculine prerogative by executing Jason's male heirs. She has 2 sons, and the new wife who might bear him further children. In a sense, Medea breaks the vassal silence by breaking the vessel and destroying the seed it is meant to contain, unquote. So here, Medea becomes independent, self-assertive, and a speaking subject. And you know, because silence is considered the most important characteristics of the femininity, if a woman speaks, it is very dangerous. So it is the violence of silence, we can say that, and it's the silence. That silence imprisons women into, again from the reach, namelessness, denial, secrets, taboo subjects, eraser, false naming, non-naming, encoding, omission, veiling, fragmentation, and lying. So lots of definitions for women if you speak. And it's a kind of tragic silence that causes women to self-denial and self-sacrifice. And in taking care of baby, Denise Kelly also represents a mother whose young children mysteriously died in a care while she's in care, portrays a dramatic case, a tragic silence for that mother. And the play starts with the Donna's inner monologue. And this monologue full of pauses, hesitations, ambiguous and incomplete phrases, so you cannot understand what she's trying to say. So you cannot, understand what she means. So you see a helpless and miserable woman without a voice. I will read a quotation from the play again. So try to give that kind of feeling of helpless. So quote, I'm standing there. I was too scared to move really. So I just stood here. And and the doors closed, just closed behind me, and I'm, so that kind of pauses indicates that she's lost. She's lost, her voice is lost in, as Cecil said, quote, the place reserved for the guilty. Guilty for everything, guilty at every turn. So it's a no choice situations for women. You are guilty for being hot. You are guilty for not being hot. You are guilty for being a mother, sacrificing mother, or you are guilty for not being a sacrificing mother. So in any case, a patriarchal society, patriarchal court will find anything to blame women. So, but the most important thing in the play is that not just the patriarchal society, not just men, but also women who have internalized the patriarchal society's dictations also disapprove Donna, and without questioning the possibility of her being innocent, those women also label Donna with the man-made works. I will just focus on the red ones from the play quote, sometimes calling things killer, murderer, bitch, you murderer, you bitch, we are going to kill you, you murdering bitch, cunt. So even there is a violence against women by women again, the fellow creatures of the same kind. So Donna in that prison is thrown away and she becomes a kind of abject. And when I say abject, you remember Christopher's famous terminology, the powers of horror and SAO objection. So Kristeva defines abject as a kind of mental and bodily disintegration when an individual meets or challenged by a kind of horrible and bad situation, and it threatens the one's integrity and stability. So in that prison, she has no option. She is abject, she is rejected. And again, the quote from the play, but I just focus on the red ones again. She was put in a higher segregation than I should have been. And she says that she was in the prison with the women who really doing bad things to their children. But she said that, but I didn't like it. I didn't fit in, just focus on it. She again says that I didn't do that. I'm innocent. But again, nobody listens to her. A woman accused of any crime, guilty or not, a fair trial is unlikely because of the male-dominated system. So we see the cases, lots of cases in Turkey, and not just in Turkey, but also in other cases. For example, I'm going to give the example of that. Actually, Dennis Kelly in the play Taking Care of Baby takes a real story, Sally Clark. And I don't remember the exact time, but in the 2000s, I think, Sally Clark was a solicitor and a lawyer, and she was wrongly convicted of murdering her two baby sons. And that's why when you focus on the play, you see these similarities and parallelities between Donna McLaughlin and Sally Clark. They were wrongly convicted of murdering their baby sons. And again, like in the play, in Sally Clark's case, there is another phallocentric and patriarchal figure named Professor Sir Roy Meadow and his theory, Munchausen syndrome of proxy. So here again, you see that in the play, you see Dr. Millard and his theory of Lehmann-Kittler syndrome. And in the real case, in the true story, you see the Sally Clark and Professor Sir Roy Meadow and his theory. So, Sally Clark was convicted of 2 life sentences, and media, again, is a kind of witch burning. Remember the old period time, nothing has changed. The media had a field day with her tragedy because it's a kind of scandalous news, and everybody gets interested in that news. And having been wrongfully imprisoned for more than 3 years, and finally she was released in 2003, but she couldn't get rid of that dreadful and painful effects. And a book was written about her titled Stolen Silence, A Mother's Fight for Justice. And I'm going to read, if you allow me, from that word again, quote, "Imagine being in jail where everyone thinks you are the scum of the earth. the lowest human being that walks the earth. The thick end of it, that she lost 5 to 6 years of her life in what was state-sponsored torture. So I think the last phrase is very heartening, because heartbreaking. State-sponsored violence. So that's why you cannot make your voice heard in that kind of patriarchal society. And her voice was wiped out, and nobody remembers her now. And that's why Durani Kelly, in that play, maybe it's a kind of through his documentary style play about Donna McLaughlin, Kelly portrays a different perspective, a destructive view to the audience. Kelly prepares or portrays a resistant reading to the given and coded messages to the courtroom stage, tries to uncover the androcentric biases, gender ideologies that stigmatize women as spatially independent women as criminal, and criminal women as monsters. And he also says that, the playwright also gives the message that normally in courts, there is a kind of self-defense system. Self-defense is an undeniable right for both sexes, but Donna was not allowed to speak. Why she was not allowed to speak? Maybe the image of the siren makes you get you some kind of ideas, because if she's allowed to speak, Donna can mesmerize any man in the court through her manipulative, evasive, deceitful nature, inner siren. You see the long established patriarchal dictations here. So her obliged silence, on the other hand, is interpreted as guilt. They said that she doesn't speak, she doesn't defend herself. So again, no choice situation. She's not allowed to speak. And if she doesn't speak, they say that she doesn't defend herself. So I'm going to quote from Catherine McKennon's story, just the bold ones, quote, "The law sees and treats women the way that men see and treat women. That it constitutes the social order in the interest of man as a gender. It achieves this through embodying and ensuring male control over women's sexuality at every level. The state, in part through law, institutionalized male power." It is the heartbreaking fact, but still we have that kind of things. The power of man and the power of law leaves no room, leaves no place, and left helpless and alone those women. And they are vilified for being a monstrous mother and becomes the targets of hatred. So as Christy was said, they are a kind of creature, a living dead, without a voice, voice without a body, and body without voice, unquote. So while I'm coming to the end of my presentation, I would like to focus on the dialogue of Donna with her mother. Because when you look at here, Donna is unheard, Donna is unsupported, Donna is unbelieved, not just by the patriarchal society, but even by her husband and her mother. And while she's talking to her mother, quote from the play, "Do you, Mom, do you think I killed Jake? You think I'm innocent?" So she has lots of pauses because she cannot ask the question directly. And maybe she's afraid of having the answer, yes, you killed your children. And after the long pauses and several pauses, repeating questions, at last, the mother gave the answer. Look at the answer, quote, "Yes, I think you are innocent." And she doesn't say, even her mother doesn't say that you are innocent. I think you are innocent. So Donna realizes the harsh reality. She goes to the deep of the deep. She falls back into the rejected, unspeakable wilderness, which is a kind of place for those helpless people imprisoned into passivity and powerlessness. But this painful stage is necessary for her self-individuation process. When you go deep into the deep, you understand that you have to climb up. So realizing that, she will end up like her mother, she said that, no, I have to say stop. So Donna, again, a quotation from Kristiva, has to expel herself, speak herself out, object herself to establish herself. And that's why she said that I will change the history and make it my own story. I will speak. I will tell my story. That's why she accepts the invitation of the media that identifies her modern day media. And Donna speaks to the interviewer. And with the interviewer, the first sentences she says, quote, I just started a metallurgy course. I'm thinking of being a jeweler or something, but my own designs. I think more craft, but nice. I got some good ideas. I'm learning Italian. My own designs, please focus on that. So here she starts to define herself with her own feelings, desires, and tastes, not the phallocentric definitions. So she changes the patriarchal docile body into the fluid body that cannot be shaped. She kills the angel, gendered body, and creates the female modernist body. So when you look at here, the interviewer also feels surprised and shocked. You seem different, he said. And Donna says that, okay, after a long pause, quote, I'm pregnant. So it's a kind of shocked answers because her pregnancy is a kind of curse for the patriarchal society, because that patriarchal society labels her as a kind of evil, unnatural mother. But for Donna, it's a kind of rebirth. So nature gives her another chance. And she said that, yes, I was scared at first, but now, quote from the play again, I got Lewisham car park in the end, and I drove to the top, and I was alone. I went to the edge, but it was a sunset, and at last I was alone, but I wasn't, was I? So I thought, you know, fuck all that, because then I'm just what they said I was. So fuck all that. And I just watched the sun set over Lewisham with my baby in me, alone together. So here it's a kind of rebirth with the baby, and killing not just the male tradition, but also her silent self. And remember the last verse of Medea, quote, die, to let a new woman be born, a new woman. So from now on, in this study, I try to focus on the Dennis Kelly's message. Dennis Kelly, even though he is a man, maybe, he tries to, warn women. He tries to establish a kind of urge to the woman. And he said that if you don't get rid of the patriarchal limitations, definitions, and controls that limit your self-identity, so the age-old narratives will keep on equating the independent woman with the criminal monster. So this is my end of the presentation. So I hope I managed the time. Okay, thank you for your nice attention.
Okay, thank you Hocam, for your timely presentation.
Mm-hmm.
Our next speaker is Mustafa Büyükgebis from Alaaddin Keykubat University, Alanya. Okay. And he is an instructor of English at Alanya Alaaddin Keykubat University School of Foreign Languages, where he has been a member since 2019. He completed his undergraduate studies at Pamukkale University, Department of English Language and Literature in 2008, his master's degree in 2014, and his PhD in 2019 from the same department. His PhD thesis was entitled Postcolonial Discontent in Tabish Kahir's Select Works. His research interests are postcolonial studies, immigration and refugee literature, gender studies, and masculinities. Mustafa, the floor is yours. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, dear Professor. Today, my title is Sexual Violence and Masculinities in Muslim Societies. In Tehmina Durani is my failure lot. As with all non-Western masculinities, Western colonizers extensively shape Muslim masculinities and therefore have a design that normalizes patriarchal understanding and heteronormative gender order. This way, the concept of Western-shaped Muslim masculinity naturally carries a serious crisis in itself. It normalizes physical and psychological violence against male individuals outside hegemonic masculinity and other gender roles. The increasing violence against women in global South, especially in Muslim communities, is also closely related to these crises mentioned above of masculinity. In Muslim societies, the role of women attributed by Western-designed hegemonic masculinity is quite passive and promotes patriarchal understanding. Any challenge to this role makes Muslim masculinity crisis visible and reacted by violence. In this context, Pakistani author Tehmina Durani's 1996 novel, My Feudal Lord, provides a significant example of the relationship between Western and Muslim masculinities. It reflects the violence caused by masculinity crisis. The novel is about the psychological and physical violence in a 14-year marriage of a woman who grows up in the upper reaches of society and has a marriage of her social class. The tragedy she experiences when she wants to end the marriage. In her novel, Durani portrays the Muslim woman figure who is oppressed under the pressure of hegemonic masculinity very clearly and creates a solid basis for the work to be done on this subject. As a result, this presentation examines the relationship of the representations of violence reflected in the novel with the crisis of Muslim masculinity and the causes and consequences of the normalization of sexual violence in Muslim societies. These representations of violence exemplified in the novel will be expanded to the relationship between Muslim masculinities and Western masculinities and their common crisis. So historically, in most cultures, the institution of family has been patriarchal and male-dominated. Male control and husbands' power to chastise their wives are usually sanctioned by religious and cultural norms. Violence is the main problem in tribal feudal society, where women are considered as property. Men firmly believe that women are made for them. Nowadays, with the increasing feminist consciousness, women started breaking the silence by bringing to the public their experience of violence within the family unit. Violence is an act carried out to hurt another person physically. It expands the term violence by including sexual, psychological, emotional, and verbal violence, and it treats of violence and all those traditions and customs that deprive women of liberty. Familial violence, or beating of wives, is the most endangering event to the women's physical safety and emotional mistreatment by their male partners. A national study in the United States estimated that about 21 to 30% of women were beaten at least once in their lives by male partners and the feudal of their areas. And it was observed that despite tremendous changes in the 20th century, discrimination and violence against women and girls remained firmly rooted in cultures around the world. The status of women remains low in society due to several factors. Women were kept subjugated under the male-dominant feudal system. Sexual harassment in the workplace typically ranges from mildly offensive sexist comments and jokes, pornographic pin-up posters, provocative electronic mail, and X-rated computer software to outright assault and rape in extreme cases. For example, in England, sexual harassment affects 1 in 7 women and 1 in 5 professional women, according to the London School of Economics. Violence against women and girls has been described as the most pervasive violation of human rights. The novel My Feudal Lord by Tehmina Durani deals with major aspects of hegemonic masculinity, sexual harassment, and violence against women. My Feudal Lord has caused many debates among the male-dominant societies of Pakistan. This work shows the real picture of women in third world countries on one hand, while on the other hand, it depicts ruling of patriarchy. This novel is giving various dimensions to see the things and to highlight the required aspects. In Durani's memoir, the male social order created a chauvinistic feature, Mustafa Kar. The male character of the memoir, Kar, was not born an autocrat, but society taught him the art of autocracy against him. Historical and literary studies reveal that much has been done to make women noticeable and visible. The feminist approach accentuated not only the differences, but also the hierarchy. Men, the more dominant than women, imposed their concepts and definitions on the masculine feminine identities. It stated that gender-based violence and all forms of sexual harassment and exploitation, including those resulting from cultural prejudice, are incompatible with dignity and worth must be eliminated. It includes physical violence such as hits, kicks, slap, beating, burning, and sexual violence, psychological violence, discrimination at any stage of life, in community and society, dowry-related violence, sexual harassment at the workplace, and etc. Domestic violence, which includes physical abuse, rape, acid throwing, burning, and killing, is widespread by feudal lords in Pakistan. After fulfilling their lust for sex, feudal lords disappear from the scene, leaving their partners behind to bear the worth of cruelties of others. Durani's autobiography, My Feudal Lord, gives an idea about her varying marital life with an imperialist feudal lord named Mr. Ghulam Mustafa Kar. Kar, a prominent politician in Pakistani politics, is a previous chief minister of Punjab. He is a prophetic sponsor of democracy, while he is no more than an inoperable wife abuser in the private affairs of his life. The memoir is divided into 3 parts, identified as Lion of Punjab, Wolf of Jungle, and Lioness. All 3 parts plot the growth of Tehmina Durani from a normal and unimportant aristocratic housewife to an unbound and liberated woman who is struggling for equal rights. My Feudal Lord is a concrete prime example of women's predicament and introverted condition. It has been written unequivocally and especially in the Pakistani context, referring to the difficulty of women in male leadership abstract order. Mustafa Kar acts upon the accurate role of patriarch and of a mannish tormentor in addition to an undue and boisterous man. Durani shows various examples of patriarchal rudeness, violence against women, and sexual harassment by the feudal lord. Although Durani's work was marked as offensive on certain justifications, yet the reality remained firm at its position that her memoir symbolizes and explains the actual picture of suppression of women in developing countries on the one hand, while on the other, it conveys the panorama of the unfair ruling of patriarchal, which is honestly responsible for the present prejudiced status of women. Kar represents a wild animal that spoils the life of many innocent women with his power and special rights. As Durani affirmed, quote, women entered Mustafa's life swiftly and left just as rapidly, unquote. This analytical outline informs the present study in the following ways. Durani was the victim of sexual harassment by feudal Lord Kar. Durani was the 6th woman who came into Mustafa's life. He used to get the women as stimulated dolls, and he ought to exploit them and fling them away. He called himself a shikari. He plucked Safiya from the heavens and locked her in a cage, a quotation from the novel. Kar was not an ordinary Pakistani man. He was presented as a respectable elected official and harsh feudal who hardened to pluck women on every occasion and from everywhere he wanted and put them into the cage of restrictions and conventions. He was a real hunter of innocent women who used them for sexual desire. In a whole novel, Durani stays behind an exploited woman. Durani acknowledged it in the text by saying that, quote, feudal law permits a man to perform in such mode, but for a wife to give up a suppose is the supreme sin, unquote. He took benefit of his masculine gender to take advantage of feminine gender through violence, sexual harassment, and clothing. It also depicts the brutality against women in such setups. These words facilitate the non-native readers to know about feudal landlords' socio-cultural, racial, and emotional structure. It also elucidates the status and places of women in the male-dominated feudal societies of Pakistan and other Asian countries. He did whatsoever he learned from his environment or ethnicity. And Mustafa says, "I'm the result of dominant, privileged class," unquote. My feudal lords formed an exact depiction of gender abuse, male supremacy, and women's withdrawn status in the patriarchal society of Pakistan. Feudal lords' laws were only for lower middle class people, but all was right for him. He never showed his attachment to his children. Durani was trodden, assumed, and disgraced by her feudal lord husband, Mr. Carr. In the second part of the novel, Law of the Jungle, Mr. Carr's affair with Tehmina's sibling, Adila, drove Tehmina nearly bore me out of terror. The second part of the novel is set in London, where Mustafa and Tehmina start a chic life as banishes. Durani's memoir presents a different paradigm of a male-dominated society this time. It spotlights the male supremacy and domination with the help of Mustafa's character. It was surveyed that Mustafa used language in his expressions to represent his dominancy, violence against women, and vindictive nature. It additionally explores the background of Pakistani feudal society. Durani proves valor by writing about the male chauvinism of feudal society and therefore the effort to remonstrate against it. The researchers plan to convey the problem of women's tyranny and male power into a glare of publicity in the traditionally conventional patriarchocentric societies of Pakistan. On the other hand, he was a chronic wife abuser and violator of women. Mustafa's sexual violence and physical beating, continuing these assaults as a part of her fortune. Durani says, quote, "There was not a day that Mustafa didn't hit me," unquote. Mustafa says a woman like the land is power, status, prestige, and an asset. Astoundingly, when Tehmina conceived as an effect of Mustafa's fierce, rapist anguishes, he acquires a lot of personal heed of her. This bestows the sexual ascendancy of the wife by the husband patriarchist talk doesn't consider sex as a mode of reciprocal physical delight, but somewhat as a tool of domination. When Mustafa was governor, he violated many women in Hira Mandi based on his status and feudality. He was the lady killer. No one could escape from his sexual thirst. Mustafa depicted a true picture of a feudal and male-dominant society where women have no personal will, rather they're puppets in the hands of males and feudal lords. Not only was Carr cruel, but also his nephew and relatives were most brutal. Most of the novel is about wife beating. Carr used to bang Durani almost every day, and Tehmina says, quote, "I had no power, no rights, and no will of my own," unquote. This state shows the lower status of women and violence against women in patriarchal feudal society. Thus, violence against women feeds off discrimination and serves to reinforce it. Women face physical and mental abuse throughout their life cycle in a male-dominated society. According to Durani, women should raise voice against violence and mistreat by their husbands and lords. She believes in the suggestion to instruct our populace in the transactions of humanity and the religion of Islam. There is a powerful and vital requirement for mobilizing and sufficiently using all associated divisions of society for planning policy and plans. Varying social approaches regarding women in Pakistani society necessitates sustained legal and social efforts. Thank you for your kind attendance.
Okay, Mustafa, thank you very much. This was a wonderful presentation about the masculinities, especially post-colonial masculinities shaped by Western civilization and Western masculinities. Now the floor is open to questions. if you have any comments or questions, then you can open your microphone and camera so that you can directly ask your questions, or you can write on the chat board here. Okay. Any questions? Anything in particular? Okay, I think these two presentations are too perfect to ask questions. Maybe our listeners, participants are quite shy to ask questions. Maybe. Okay. So then the floor is open to your questions, and these really comprehensive and cross-cutting presentations addressed to the influences of masculinities or patriarchy on shaping not only women's lives, but also they put a great deal of burden on men as well, that men have to take care to deal with, to have an equal life along with women and LGBTI as well. Okay. Any questions? Okay, I think there are no questions to ask. And I'd like to thank you to Derya Hocam and Mustafa once again for their excellent presentations. I think there will be another session following our session today. So let's call today, and thank you again, Derya and Mustafa,
Thank you.
for your participation. And I'd like to especially thank to all the other participants that support our speakers here today. And I think we can end the session.
Okay, thank you, Hocam.
Thank
Okay,
you.
see you. Take care of yourself. Okay.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.